he had driven away in his shit brown Allegra in the first few pages and left us alone with Rosa, oh, what a book this would have been. Unfortunately, he sticks around. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. Although, full disclosure guys, I don't really want to talk about books today. I feel as stuffed up with a cold. I'm not feeling great, but I'm conscious that I missed uploading last week, again for not feeling well for a different reason. So healthy. And I didn't want to miss 2 weeks on the trot, so I'm just going to get through this. My lighting and everything's shoddy. My hair's still wet from my shower. Do not care. I just want to get through this. So I'm going to wrap up my reading for February. Apart from my BookTube Prize reading, which I won't talk about, I'll keep that back and I'll do a review and ranking video for that once this first round of judging the octafinals is complete. I'll sit down and talk about the books that I have read for the translated fiction grouping that I've been allocated. I'm not as far ahead in my reading for the BookTube Prize as I would like to be, mainly because the first book that I read put me in a bit of a slump. So I'm about 40 pages from the end of the second book and I'll get that finished today. I've got 3 books to pick up from a library in Glasgow and I can't do that until next week. And then thankfully the third book is one that I read last year, which I think is recent enough that I won't need to reread it. So I will get my reading done in time. I might just need to prioritise it a bit more in the coming weeks. So I'll talk about the other books that I read in February. So I think there's 4 or 5. And I'll start with my favourites because I feel like they deserve the most attention, and then I'll kind of work my way down the scale. So my best book of February was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily and Danforth. I read this as an audio book, although I did then get approved for the NetGalley. Ain't that the way? And because I'd wanted to read it since it came out. I'd heard about it on Book Riot's All the Books podcast, and it just sounded like so much fun. And I got turned down for the NetGalley initially, so that's why I went and bought the audiobook. And then of course I got approved, but it is what it is. It's set in a girls' school in New England, and we opened in 1902, where some of the students have become obsessed with the writings of a young female memoirist called Mary McLean. And this young woman invokes the devil in her passion for personal and sexual freedoms from the norms of the day. These girls form the Plain Bad Heroines Society and are rumoured to be more than just friends. But right at the start of the book, they both die horrifically, being stung to death by a nest of yellow jacket wasps. And this sets off like a whole chain of mysterious events for the school and its proprietress. And then kind of concurrently we have a modern day storyline where a young woman has written a book about these previous goings on at the school, which is heavily influenced by the relationship she has with the last remaining family member of that proprietress. The book is being made into a movie directed by an is it enfant terrible? My French. It's starring the hottest young actress on the block as well, and the book follows these dual timelines about what's happening back in the school in 1902 and the strange occurrences that surround the movie production. There's no doubt that something is cursed, but is it the school, the memoirs, or something deeper? I had the best time reading this book. Danforth has created a story with multiple layers that are woven together perfectly. So let's take the historical timeline, which is like dripping with mystery and feels very of its time and place, whilst showing us the relationships between women that would never have made it into print at the time. It's heavy on the atmosphere and tension, whilst allowing the characters to still shine through. And then the modern storyline has a completely different feel, with characters who are really snarky and, you know, totally enjoying the freedoms allowed to them in how they identify. And we as readers are allowed behind the curtain of the movie production enough to feel like we know more than most characters until it slowly dawns on us that really we know nothing. And both timelines are shot through with this spectre of something sort of sinister, that we can't really pin down. And so the result is something that pulls you forward and really keeps you guessing. And I honestly couldn't put it down. This book totally lived up to my expectations and is so satisfying when that happens. I think it's just fantastic. It's dark, it's funny, it's sapphic as hell, and I really loved it. And I'm glad now that I've received the NetGalley version, because I definitely probably will return to that book at some point. It'd be nice to read it in a different format. And then next, I really enjoyed Three Apples Fell from the Sky by Narine Abgaryan. This was a Shelterbox book club pick, I think the first of the year, no, the second of the year, so this is obviously February's pick. And this is set almost completely in one mountain village in Armenia. And so this book is both the history and the stories of the village and its people. So through war years, famine, drought, natural disasters, about the people who persist with humour and love. And this book really captures the beauty of the everyday, but, well, for me at least, in a setting which I haven't often seen on the page. And the book centres on a woman called Anatolia. She's in her 50s and she's certain that she's dying. So she takes herself off to bed, convinced that she will not wake up in the morning. And that sounds so sad. And there are many tough struggles for the village in this book. There are famine and droughts, plagues of insects and vermin, and almost all of their young men died fighting in the war. So it's quite an elderly village, which is very isolated, so they don't really have access to any healthcare or amenities. But this isn't a sad or harrowing book. It's told in almost like little vignettes about the different people and the different families in the village, and it comes together in a really sweet, heartwarming way. It really made me smile. So yeah, like I said, this is a Shelterbox book club pick, and it's quite a different vibe to what I've become used to in the picks that we get from that book club. Anatolia's story and the kind of unexpected romance that takes place tied in really nicely with the story of the village itself. I really loved that. And there's just a real warmth and heart to this. I thought it was a real gem of a book. And then I went on and read Tangerine by Christine Mangan. This was my pick, as decreed by the TBR Tackle readathon that Kieran from KD Books is doing. I was done a bit dirty in February, not gonna lie. Had to remove, was it 3? I think it was 3 books that I really wanted to get to, all because of certain page limit specifications. So I ended up picking up this one instead. So, a little bit of background. I fell in love with the kind of idea of Morocco when I read, I think it's Esther Freud's, I think she was the author, Hideous, Kinky, when I was a young teenager. And then that idea I'd always had in my head became reality when I went to Marrakesh back in 2015. I still want to go back to Morocco though, because I feel like I didn't fully get the whole Moroccan experience that time due to who I travelled with, but you know, money. So living through books it is for now. So I think that was probably the primary reason for me picking up this book, the setting. This is the story of Alice, who is living in Tangier with her husband on the eve of the Moroccan emancipation from French rule. She isn't happy. She's scared to venture out into the Medina. She's oppressed by the heat, and she spends most of her time shut away at home while her husband John does like whatever it is he does for the British government. Until one day, her former friend Lucy arrives, unannounced and very much uninvited. The women were inseparable at college, but they haven't spoken since a terrible event which happened over a year ago. But Lucy worms her way in, and her desire to rekindle their friendship and also to explore Tangier start to rub off on Alice, until John goes missing and things start to unravel. So although the setting was what made me pick up this book, it was the premise that made me want to read it. And it's the premise that does pull you through this book. Why did the women fall out? What is John up to? And for that matter, what is Lucy up to as well? This is very much a psychological thriller, and it's one in which we get the perspectives of both the manipulator and the mark. And I really enjoyed that aspect a lot. Although it's based on a female friendship, which is a topic I love to read about, I kind of feel like the book didn't deliver on that. I don't think enough time was spent given to the friendship that came before the fallout that the two women had. So some of that felt a bit flat for me, but I guess I did still understand the motivations of Lucy, so I suppose that friendship element wasn't entirely lacking. What was lacking for me was the sense of place. It's nearly there, but it did feel often very much more tell than show, and I kind of think like this story could be told anywhere, were it not for mentions of like mint tea and a couple of references to the call to prayer. But it is a fun read. It's pacey. I did enjoy it. It's not a bad book. I think I just went into it with slightly different expectations. So if, like me, you want a book that's got a bit more Moroccan realness that's set in this time, I definitely recommend Leila Slimani's The Country of Others. That might just scratch that itch a little better. But yeah, like it was a fun read, but not an amazing one. I also read My Heart Went Walking by Sally Hanan, which is set in 1980s rural Ireland, where we meet 16-year-old Una, who has just found out that she's pregnant. The baby is her best friend's, but she doesn't want to tell him in fear that she will ruin his life and the plans that he's made for his future. She tells her mum, and her mum is determined that she is going to go to the home for young mothers run by the nuns in order to put the baby up for adoption. Una doesn't want to do that, so she runs away to Dublin where no one can find her, and we follow her as she tries to make a new life, as well as what's happening in the lives of those that she has left behind. I wanted to read this after really loving Tish Delaney's Before My Actual Heart Breaks, which is one of my favourite books of last year. The premise gave me similar vibes, but in reality, My Heart Went Walking is a much lighter, more commercial version. That isn't necessarily a criticism of this book. It was fun and enjoyable to read. It did bring up some good points about finding yourself pregnant at a young age, ones which felt authentic and to which I could relate. But it's also a total fairy tale version of that situation. For Una, things conveniently just fall into place. Tough things do happen in this book for Una's sister in particular, but the bitter is tempered with a sweet in a way which, although yes, it was, heartwarming, it was just a bit too neat and sweet for my expectation. Still, nice cozy read, some very well drawn characters and a nice sense of place. And then finally, although if I'd thought about this a bit more, this probably wouldn't be the last book I discussed, because it probably wasn't my least favourite. The final three are kind of on a same level but for different reasons. But the last one is Partisan's Daughter by Louis de Bernieres, which I read as an audiobook, and I'll be honest, I don't remember buying it. I don't know why I bought it. Potentially because it mentions something about Yugoslavia in the blurb, and I'm really interested in reading more books from authors who come from, or books that are set in like the Balkan regions. So I think that might have been why I had this. But I mentioned this book in my last shelf indulgence video that I've done, and I wasn't sure if I was liking it, and that feeling didn't really shift as I was listening to it until like the end, which feels very satisfying and saved how I felt about the whole thing. But anyway, this book is basically structured around the visits that a bland, middle-aged travelling salesman called Christian makes to a woman called Rosa in this dilapidated shared house that she lives in. He meets Rosa one night. This book is set in the 70s. He's trying to pick up his first ever prostitute. She's not a prostitute, although unknown to him, she was actually pretending to be one to alleviate a night of boredom. But yeah, so when he realizes that she's not a prostitute, to apologize for his blunder, he offers her a lift home. And this sparks off like an odd relationship where he visits her frequently, and she tells him her life story. She's an illegal immigrant from what was Yugoslavia, and her stories are provoking and sad, although often it's questionable how much truth they contain. But Christian laps them up in a sort of emotional affair that he justifies by snivelling about his wife. This is described as a love story, but I would give strong side eye to anyone who thinks this is romantic. Both of them are using the other person for their own reasons, and the conclusion of this story is very telling about Christian's core values. Rosa is a fantastic character. She's fascinating. I really enjoyed the majority of her stories, save for the inclusion of incest, so a trigger warning for that. Christian, however, is a whiny, self-involved drip of a man who has fooled himself into thinking that he's like this super compassionate and sensitive man and cares about this woman, Rosa. If he had driven away in his shit brown Allegra in the first few pages and left us alone with Rosa, oh, what a book this would have been. Unfortunately, he sticks around. The world doesn't need the perspective of men like Christian, but it does need for them to have a mirror held up to themselves. And I think this book does that, perhaps too subtly for my taste. So subtle that I do wonder if that's even what the author's intention was at all. Maybe that's just in the way that I've read it instead, but it was enough to make me glad that I hadn't wasted my time by reading this book and spending so much time with an insufferable git like Christian. So those are the books that I read in February. I'm really sorry that you could definitely hear in my voice that I am choked full of the cold. This is probably an unpleasant experience for all of us, which is a damn shame because my channel has really picked up since I've started back up from my hiatus, and I'm not doing myself any favours by snottering my whole way through this video. But if you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. Have you read any of these books? If you did, what did you think of them, or are there any that I've inspired you to either pick up or stay well away from? Let me know in the comments below, and I will be back either on Wednesday with a shelf indulgence video or next Saturday with my regular bookish video if I haven't died in a snottery heap. Oh god, it's actually getting worse. Snottery, no, can't do it. So I think it's just time I said, well, I won't do my usual goodbye because I don't really want to get my germs, so just bye bye. I read that as a young teenager.